Hi there, this is Secret of Roanish from Secret of Roanish Films, and welcome to a new series of videos that I'm going to be doing, which are pretty much in lieu of doing top 10s, because top 10s do tend to change and evolve, and also you limit yourself to talking about a filmmaker or a genre of films that only have 10 entries. So I'm just going to call this series of videos In the Frame, and I'm pretty much just going to talk about either a director or actor or a genre of films, rather than restricting to a top 10. So I thought I would start with my soapbox director that I like to rant and rave about. For me, the best American writer-director of the last 40 years, John Sayles. Again, some people might argue for Terrence Malick or Brian De Palma or Paul Schrader, or Paul Thomas Anderson perhaps. But for me, it's John Sayles. He's a writer, director, editor, part-time actor in some of his films and other people's films. He also writes novels. He has a new novel out at the moment, or it's coming out quite soon. As you have known, if you're familiar with my channel, I do bang on about John Sayles quite a lot, but it's only because he is criminally underrated. There's only 2 of his films, to my knowledge, that you can actually get on Blu-ray. Some of them don't even have a DVD release, or a decent DVD release. I think one of the reasons is his films are political. His films are about groups of people or areas of society that people don't really want to hear about. Certainly from a mainstream studio system kind of way of thinking, his films aren't huge box office. He's been nominated for 2 Oscars. One of the films I'll get to, and his kind of response to how he actually got nominated for an Oscar. So I'm just going to kind of go through his career, film by film, talk a little bit about them, not a huge amount, and hopefully this, if you're not familiar with his work, this might pique your interest. And if there happens to be anybody from any Blu-ray labels listening, which I doubt very much, please can we release some of his films in Blu-ray, because some of his films are simply the best American films of their decade. So John Sayles, like quite a lot of filmmakers in America, started under the wings of Roger Corman. It's funny, on his IMDb page, he's actually more famous for being a writer on The Howling by Joe Dante, on Piranha by Joe Dante. He also wrote Alligator. So he's almost more famous for writing scripts of kind of B-movie horror films than he actually is of being the greatest American writer-director of the last 40 years. It's funny that. So then he managed to get a budget together, and he made The Return of the Caucus 7, which is in this 3 DVD set. Again, some of these are easier to find on secondary sellers than others. Return to Caucus 7, I think it was made for about $40,000. Obviously, big budgets is something that John Sayles isn't particularly familiar with or used to working with. And it's about a group of friends who were 60s activists and were arrested, and they kind of come together at a gathering and reminisce and tell stories about their lives and how their lives have turned out. It was essentially ripped off and almost remade as The Big Chill, which is again more famous for Kevin Costner being cut out of the film than perhaps the film itself. I would say Return to Caucus 7, it's a solid film, it's a nice little film, but it's obviously minor in Sayles' catalogue of work, but it's obviously his first one. And if you want to start chronologically, then that's the one to start. Next is Liana, which again is on this 3-disc set, the John Sayles collection. And Liana is a story about a woman who realises that she may be a lesbian and she may be attracted more to women than men. John Sayles actually gives a performance as the man in her life, who's obviously not dealing with it the best. And this is kind of the first film that you realise how good a screenwriter John Sayles is. I mean, again, you can argue whether he is the best American writer-director of the last 40 years, but as far as screenwriting, I don't think there's anybody that comes close to Sayles as far as being able to write for anybody. He is able to write for any demographic, any age range, any kind of class range. His dialogue is just so on point. He doesn't necessarily have great speeches and great one-liners, but his ear for dialogue is one of the things that just sets him apart from other filmmakers. There's never like dialogue that comes out of one of his characters' mouths that you go, oh, that doesn't sound right, or they wouldn't really say that. His understanding of people and how people are and how people speak is just next level, and that's kind of one of the reasons why, you know, he's one of my favourite filmmakers, and he's phenomenal. So Liana, again, not one of his greatest films, but it's certainly a 4 out of 5 for me, and it's a kind of step up from The Return of the Caucus 7. So next, he actually had a studio project with Paramount. It's Baby It's You, and bizarrely, this is one of the few films of his that's on Blu-ray, and it's by far not even close to his best work. Again, he had studio interference and problems with the making of it. It's stars Rosanna Arquette, as you can see, and Vincent Spano, who would appear later in City of Hope. And it's set in the 60s, and it's about that period of the end of high school, going to college, or going into the big wide world. And it kind of follows these two characters and how they, you know, seem to be big deals in high school, but then when you actually go to college, or in Vincent Spano's case, when he goes out into the world, you are a very small fish. Again, it's intelligent, beautifully written and played, but again, it's not any earth-shattering film. It's a solid film, but it kind of puts Sayles on the road to realising, I don't want to work in the studio system. I'd much rather be an independent filmmaker, despite the problems getting budgets and things like that, which he would experience later on in his career. And then next, after his experience with Baby It's You, he went back to doing low budget independence, and he did The Brother from Another Planet with the wonderful Joe Morton, who would appear in later films by Sayles. This is, I would say, the best one out of his first four. This is just a beautiful little comedy about an alien played by Joe Morton who lands in Harlem. He's only an alien because he's got very funny feet, but he's mute. He doesn't speak English, which is kind of makes sense because so many alien films, the alien somehow manages to learn English very quickly. So Joe Morton just gives this wonderful performance as he just reacts facially to the people that meet him and what they say. Because he is mute, people just naturally open up to him and just tell them their life story. And of course the way Joe Morton emotes facially, it's just absolutely beautiful. It's a funny little film. It's a beautiful little film. It's something that Arrow Video perhaps should really pick up and release, he said hopingly. John Sayles and David Strathairn turn up as bad aliens dressed in black, who want to bring Joe Morton back to punish him. Obviously David Strathairn, this is his, he appears and then he would appear later in John Sayles films, because again Sayles kind of had a stock, certain actors that he would use multiple times. Brother from Another Planet is probably, like I said, the best of his early films. It's a good place to start. It is just a beautifully crafted comedy, but obviously it still has those social points and those political points in it. So once he's kind of done his early low budget films, and then he's had the issues with the studio over Baby It's You, he went and did his first masterpiece, in my opinion. 3 years later, he would muster a whopping $4 million or something. And then he would do Matewan, 1987, which is in the conversation for the best films of the 80s. This was recently released by Criterion, as you can see, spine number 999. I'd done a random review on this. I did a video on the news that Criterion were releasing it, because there'd always been rumours that they were going to release Matewan, so I won't talk too much about it. It's just an amazing film, beautiful film, shot by Haskell Wexler, who kind of shared Sayles' political views and would shoot later Sayles' film. It's just phenomenal. It's the first time working with Chris Cooper. I think this was Chris Cooper's one of his first films, and again he would appear later in Sayles' films. David Strathairn's in it, Gordon Clapp from the early days, he's in it. It's just a beautiful film. Mary McDonnell, who again would appear in a later Sayles film in spectacular fashion. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, James Earl Jones is in it as well. That's the thing, Sayles films were never a huge box office. They don't seem to be that popular, but the grade of actor that he manages to work with is pretty impressive, because it's almost as if actors want to work with him because they know they're going to get a excellent script. again, they might not get a lot of exposure, the films might not do huge box office, but they know they're going to be in a quality project. So next, again, something a little bit more mainstream. It's 8 Men Out. As you can see, this actually has a Blu-ray release. Can you believe it? This is about the 1919 Chicago White Sox, or the Black Sox as they were known. It's the story that's kind of hinted in the background in Field of Dreams for Shoeless Joe Jackson. Again, it's relatively low budget, but it's just absolutely beautiful. It's shot beautifully. I'm actually just trying to see who did it. As usual with quite a lot of his films, it's scored by Mason Daring, who was actually a lawyer in one of his early films, and then he suddenly, he wanted to make music, so he's pretty much made the music for all of Sayles' films, or just about all of his films. This has an amazing cast, again for a low budget film. D.B. Sweeney, Charlie Sheen, John Cusack, Michael Lerner, Clifton James, who again would appear later in Sayles' work, Dave Strathairn, Christopher Lloyd. Sayles himself plays one of the kind of snide journalists of the time. It's just a beautiful film. Again, I wouldn't say it's a major work by Sayles, but again, it's a 4 out of 5. This one has a feature commentary by Sayles. Quite a lot of these DVDs, I should say, Mate One has one as well, and Sayles' commentaries are amongst the best. I know I'm biased, but I don't really care. Sayles generally in his commentaries will give you a kind of history lesson of the subject, background, and then he'll pretty much give you a guide to making low budget films. His commentaries are just wonderful, and I would highly recommend you listen to them if you can find the DVDs. Next, in 1991 is City of Hope, and as you can see, it doesn't really have an official release, which is an absolute travesty, because it's his second masterpiece as far as I'm concerned. Again, I did a random review on it. Nazarin Prod, one of the friends of the channel, he did a random review on it, or a review on it, I should say. It's just a phenomenal film, and again, the fact that it doesn't even have a proper DVD release is quite frankly shameful. It's essentially about the workings of a city. It's just a wonderfully complicated, interwoven tapestry of how a city works, from the mayor's office to all the side deals that are done through unions and construction companies, to lower level hoods. Again, Sayles plays the owner of a garage who's a bit shady, because Sayles is one of those directors who can actually act. I'm not naming names of directors that insert themselves into their own films who can't actually act. Sayles can actually do a good turn, but that's a side note. Again, a sprawling film, but it just works beautifully. The script's amazing. We see the struggles in the black community, of the Italian community, the mayor's office. It all just kind of works together. Angela Bassett's in it, Joe Morton again, who would kind of be a common thread, David Strathairn in an unusual role, Chris Cooper, Vincent Spano again. It's just phenomenal. I remember reading a review of it years ago, and it was somebody who worked in the New York mayor's office, and they pretty much said it's the most accurate depiction of how a city actually works. But again, it's not to suggest it's a dry film. As with all Sayles films, there's just so much humanity in it. It's just a masterwork in every level, and like I say, it's It's quite frankly disgusting that it doesn't have a proper release, because it's a great American film. It's not as if it's like from an obscure country, even though that's an insult to obscure countries, but you know what I mean. So after City of Hope, 2 years later, we have arguably my favourite John Sayles film, and maybe even his best, another straight up masterpiece, Passion Fish from 1993, one which he was nominated, and I think Mary McDonnell was nominated. Didn't win it, but the Oscars, we know, are self-congratulatory nonsense. And also stars Alfred Woodard. And again, one of the issues with Sayles, and maybe why he's not kind of bigger than he really ought to be, is because the subject matter of his films, if you do like a 2-sentence synopsis, perhaps doesn't sound that interesting. This is kind of TV movie of the week material. A soap opera actress gets paralysed, goes back to her old family home on the bayou in Louisiana, and goes through a series of home help until she kind of forms a bond with Alfred Woodard. Again, it's kind of TV movie of the week, but what elevates it is the performances, and of course Sayles' script, which is just phenomenal. The one flaw in the film is it's only 135 minutes. It really should be about 5 hours long, because as you get to know these people, these characters, you want to pretty much follow them for the rest of their lives, because obviously the story only gets to a point. It's funny, it's moving. David Strathairn turns up as an old high school flame of Mary McDonnell's. It's just exquisite. It's beautiful. It still has a hard edge. There's a lot of humour to it. It's just beautiful. Again, Sayles does the editing, Mason Daring does the music. It's a phenomenal film. If you track it down, it's so worth your time. It's just absolutely magical. And again, it's an argument for the best 90s film, but you'll never hear about it. So after that, he had a little bit of a change of pace and did The Secret of Roanish, which is a little Irish story about selkies and folklore. Again, after the heavy hitting masterpieces, this is perhaps only a 4 out of 5 star film. But again, there's no patronising Irishness that sometimes American filmmakers have. Again, Sayles' script is on point. This is actually adapted from a book, unlike most of his work, which is from his own little brain. But it's a beautiful little film. It's lyrical, but again, it doesn't have any of that kind of sometimes condescending Irishness that Hollywood kind of treats these kind of films. You know, let's be honest, Sayles isn't really Hollywood. So after that, he came back and did perhaps his most famous film, 1996. This is Lone Star, which is, he's back to masterwork territory. This is another film he was nominated for Best Screenplay, and Sayles pretty much said the only reason he was nominated is 1, it's set in Texas and there's lots of people in Texas, and 2, there's a gun in it, so that's why he got an Oscar nomination. This is just beautifully crafted. It's set in the Tex-Mex border. It's multi-generational. It jumps from time periods, but it's edited so beautifully that somebody just kind of is in a room, the camera pans slightly, and then we're in the past. It's just beautifully done. Chris Cooper, Matthew McConaughey, Chris Christopherson, who again would then appear in a few more Sayles films. Elizabeth Pena, Joe Morton is in it as well. Clifton James, who's in previous Sayles films. It's just an absolutely stunning film about the past and the impact of the past on your future. It has a wonderfully subversive ending that if you're not paying attention you might not actually realise how subversive it is. Again, the dialogue is on point. It's all these characters cross and the influence and their pasts. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's so funny when this was kind of out in home video or whatever. I always remember a quote that said, "Oh, Sayles' dialogue is as dazzling as Tarantino's," and it's like Tarantino is nowhere near the dialogue of John Sayles. I mean, it's almost as if they're in two different genres. To even have Tarantino and John Sayles in the same sentence is just like ridiculous. I know I'm biased. Yeah, this is even Frances McDormand turns up and gives a wonderful little cameo as Chris Cooper's slightly OCD ex-wife. It's just a stunning film, absolutely beautiful, and if you haven't seen it already, please somehow track it down. Next, so what does a filmmaker do after he's nominated for an Oscar? Well, he makes a film like Men with Guns, which is set in an unnamed Central American country, and shoots it all in Spanish and indigenous Indian tongues. Let's get as far away from Oscar nominations as possible. This is another straight up masterpiece. It's an absolutely beautiful film. It's about a doctor played by Federico Luppi, who has appeared in Kronos by Del Toro, and The Devil's Backbone by Del Toro, and he plays a doctor who's a very privileged doctor. Generals and politicians come to his practice, and he sent out trainee doctors into the villages, into the country, and he hears a rumour that one of them is dead, so he goes out to try and find them. It's a country that's ravaged by civil war and all manner of atrocities going on, and it's really him getting his eyes opened to the real world as he goes deeper and deeper into the countryside, deeper and deeper into the jungle. It's essentially a road movie. He meets characters along the way, a kind of fallen priest, a soldier who may or may not be a deserter. It's just beautiful, it's moving, it's got a wonderful central performance. Again, doesn't matter, it's in a different language. Sayles just nails, which rhymes, Sayles just nails the dialogue. It's funny because he said one of the reasons to shoot it in non-English is the fact that characters have philosophical conversations, and he kind of went in foreign cinema, in non-English language cinema, it's fairly common for characters to sit down and have philosophical conversations, but it's something that doesn't necessarily happen in kind of most Hollywood films. It doesn't seem realistic, whereas non-English language films don't have a problem with people talking about, philosophy and whatever, which is an interesting view. Again, this has a Sayles commentary, which I highly recommend. The film is just a masterpiece. So this is 1997. And then 1999, he comes back with another just utterly fantastic film, Limbo, which again starts as a kind of multi-character tapestry about Alaska and the history of Alaska and how it became a kind of tourist destination, and then it kind of changes and it focuses on Mary Elizabeth Master Antonio, which I could never get her name right, and her beginnings of a relationship with David Strathairn and her daughter Vanessa Martinez, and then they end up on a boat with Strathairn's estranged brother Casey Shimesco, which again I can never pronounce his name, and it ends up that they're stranded on an island, and then the film kind of develops into something else. It has an ending that kind of divides people, but I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Again, brilliant performances, tremendous script, and just a beautiful, beautiful film. It's stunning, and stunning scenery. If you like scenery, it's just phenomenal. So from 1999, we go to 2002, and probably his last straight up masterwork, Sunshine State. Again, set in Florida, and again it's a cross-cultural, multi-stranded story with different characters. You can see Angela Bassett and Edie Falco and Timothy Hutton, Mary Steenburgen, who was in other films, Jane Alexander, Ralph Waite, and again it's about the history of Florida. It's about business, developing property. It's, again, you kind of have to see the film. Well, you have to see all of John Sayles' films immediately. Do it now. It's just beautiful, beautifully written, beautifully acted. Again, it has plenty of socio-political points, but it's just hugely enjoyable. Stunning film, and again it has a Sayles commentary, which I urge you to listen to after you've stopped this video and bought all these films if you can find them. Then after Sunshine State, 2003, Casa de los Babies, which is probably minor Sayles, but again, minor Sayles is still well worth seeing. And again, it's got a fairly obvious political point, as it follows 6 American women who go down to Acapulco in Mexico to adopt babies. And as they are kind of delayed in the process, we get to know them and we get to know their motivations. Again, just a stunning cast. Vanessa Martinez, who was in Limbo, Daryl Hannah, who would then appear in his next film, Lily Taylor, Mary Steenburgen, who was in Sunshine State, Marcia Gay Harden's in it, Maggie Gyllenhaal's in it, Susan Lynch, whose first film role was The Secret of Roanish with Sayles. Again, a beautifully crafted little film. Again, perhaps not amongst his best, but if you're into Sayles, it's obviously well worth seeing and well worth having. Next, 2004, is Silver City. Again, this is Sayles, again, more obviously political because it's about politics. Again, this has a ridiculous cast: Mario Bello, Thora Birch, David Clennon, Chris Cooper, Richard Dreyfuss, Miguel Ferrer, Daryl Hannah, Danny Houston, Chris Christopherson's back, Michael Murphy, Tim Roth, Ralph Waite, Billy Zane. I mean, this one, maybe it's because of the subject matter, maybe it's because of the people involved as far as politics and roundabout politics. This is a film that perhaps, unlike most of John Sayles' films, you don't want to be longer, because in general the characters aren't actually that likeable. Again, this has a commentary by Sayles and Maggie Renzi, who's his longtime partner and producer. Yeah, again, perhaps not the best Sayles, but certainly well worth checking out. And then the next film he did in 2012, I believe, is Amigo, which I haven't seen. You can't get a copy of it. I believe it's on YouTube in 2 parts. It was on Amazon.com streaming for a while, but there's no official DVD or Blu-ray release. Hopefully that changes. This is set in the American war in the Philippines. Again, Chris Cooper's in it, but unfortunately I can't really speak to it because I haven't actually seen it. It's the only Sayles film I don't have, or I haven't seen. Hopefully I'll remedy that at some point. And then the following year, his last film currently is Go for Sisters, which again is perhaps minor Sayles, but it's still better than 99% of the stuff that you'll watch. This stars Edward James Olmos, Lisa Gay Hamilton and Yolanda Ross. And this is about 2 friends who, when they were growing up, could go for sisters, as in people thought they were sisters. One of them is a parole officer, the other one is a drug addict who's just coming out of prison and whose son has gone missing in Mexico. So the only person she can turn to is her ex long-term friend, who's the parole officer, and they go on a journey to Mexico to find her son, aided by the wonderful Edward James Olmos, looking craggier than his old Miami Vice days. Again, it's a beautifully played film, beautifully crafted. Again, perhaps not major Sayles, but like I said, just a beautiful little film. And that is his last film. He has been working on a film called To Save the Man, which was previously under the title Carlisle School, and this is based on the true story of essentially the camps America used to have, where they would take young Native American men and try and make them white or train them in how to be white. It's, the old myth of inside Native American there's a white man trying to get out. So you can kind of see why he's been struggling to get it made, because it's 7 years since his last film, and pretty much for the last 5 or 6 years you've constantly heard stories of where he's at with Carlisle School, or now under the title To Save the Man. You can see why perhaps he's not getting much support or financial support in making this film, because again he's shining a light on not a brilliant chapter in American history, but unfortunately this kind of stuff happened. And again, that's the subject matter that Sayles has looked at throughout his career, and perhaps that's why he's not more widely regarded or there's more exposure to his work. But God, he deserves it. He's one of those filmmakers that if I was to win a huge amount of money in the lottery, I would track him and Maggie Renzi down and give him some money to spend however he wanted to. His films are important. You can, maybe in this video I've given you the impression that, his subject matters are dry and kind of political, and why would I want to watch that? But he writes his characters so beautifully, the stories are so well crafted and engaging, that you learn so much about history in some of his films without him banging you over the head about it, without it being really dry, which is a danger when you're trying to do those kind of films. Yeah, to me, he is the greatest American writer-director the last 40 years, and in the conversation for one of the best screenwriters ever, period, full stop. And if you haven't seen his films, hopefully this has piqued your interest, and hopefully you will join me for more In the Frame episodes, where I essentially get out of having to limit myself to 10 titles to talk about. Yeah, thanks very much for watching. Leave comments below what your favourite John Sayles films are, and which ones you've seen, and hopefully we'll see you again for, like I said, more In the Frame episodes. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying farewell.